In 1932, the Australian Army officially declared war on birds. And the birds won. This wasn't a joke, it actually happened in a region called Western Australia, where thousands of emus were destroying wheat farms after a drought pushed them inland. Farmers, many of them war veterans, asked the government for help, and the government sent actual soldiers with machine guns. The plan seemed simple. Round up the emus, open fire, problem solved. But emus turned out to be fast, unpredictable, and surprisingly hard to hit. They scattered in every direction, dodged bullets, and even survived direct hits without stopping. After several days, soldiers had fired over 10,000 rounds and killed only a few hundred birds out of an estimated 20,000. The military eventually withdrew, essentially admitting defeat against an enemy that couldn't even understand it was at war. To this day, the Emu War remains one of the most humiliating military campaigns in modern history, and it's taught in Australia partly as a joke, and partly as a lesson in underestimating nature. Speaking of things science couldn't explain, in 1994 a woman named Gloria Ramirez was rushed to a hospital in California, and what happened next terrified the entire medical staff. Doctors and nurses trying to save her began collapsing one by one. Some fainted, others felt burning in their throats, and a few even stopped breathing temporarily. The emergency room had to be evacuated, and Gloria herself died shortly after. Rumors spread instantly. People called her the toxic lady, convinced some kind of chemical reaction inside her body had turned her into a walking poison. Investigators later suggested a more scientific explanation, that she may have been using a home remedy containing dimethyl sulfoxide, which combined with oxygen and medical equipment could have created toxic gases in a confined space. But no theory has ever been fully proven, and to this day, the case remains one of the strangest unexplained medical mysteries in American hospital history. 23 people were affected that night, and some never fully recovered from the symptoms. If you think that's strange, imagine an entire town dancing itself to death. In July 1518, in Strasbourg, a woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began dancing. She didn't stop for days. Within a week, dozens of people joined her, dancing non-stop through exhaustion, bleeding feet, and collapse. Some reportedly danced until they suffered heart attacks or strokes. Local authorities, believing more dancing was the cure, even hired musicians and built a stage to keep the momentum going, which only made things worse. By the time it ended, historians estimate around 15 people were dying every day at the peak of the event. Modern researchers still argue over the cause. Some blame mass psychogenic illness triggered by extreme stress and famine, others point to ergot poisoning from moldy rye bread, which can cause hallucinations and spasms. Whatever the true cause, the dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the most documented yet unexplained mass phenomena in European history. Now here's a story about surviving the unsurvivable, twice. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was a Japanese engineer on a business trip to Hiroshima in August 1945 when the first atomic bomb detonated. He survived the blast with burns and temporary blindness, but he lived. Desperate to get home, he traveled back to his actual city of residence, which happened to be Nagasaki. 3 days later, the second atomic bomb hit that exact city while he was there. Somehow, Yamaguchi survived again. He went on to live a long life, eventually becoming one of the very few officially recognized double survivors of both atomic bombings, a status confirmed by the Japanese government decades later. He passed away in 2010 at the age of 93 from stomach cancer, unrelated directly to radiation exposure according to doctors. His story is often used as a haunting symbol of both the horror of nuclear war and the strange unpredictability of human survival against odds that seem statistically impossible. From nuclear horror to something almost absurd, in January 1919, Boston experienced a disaster nobody could have predicted, a flood of molasses. A massive storage tank holding over 2 million gallons of molasses suddenly burst, sending a wave of thick syrup crashing through the streets at an estimated speed of 35 miles per hour. The wave was reportedly over 25 feet high at its peak. People, horses, and buildings were swept away or crushed under the weight of the sticky flood. 21 people died, many drowning in molasses so thick that rescue became nearly impossible. Cleanup took weeks, and residents claimed they could smell molasses in the area for decades afterward, especially during hot summer days. Engineers later determined the tank had been poorly built and inadequately tested, a shortcut that cost lives. The Great Molasses Flood remains one of the strangest industrial disasters in American history, proof that even something as sweet as molasses can turn deadly under the wrong conditions. Sometimes the strangest true stories involve deception rather than disaster. During World War II, British intelligence needed to trick Nazi Germany about where the Allies would invade next. Their solution was Operation Mincemeat, a plan almost too strange to believe. They took the body of a homeless man who had died from rat poison, dressed him as a British officer, and planted fake documents suggesting the invasion would target Greece instead of Sicily. The body was released into the ocean near Spain, where it was expected to wash ashore and be examined by Nazi sympathizers. The plan worked perfectly. German forces shifted troops away from Sicily, allowing Allied forces to invade with far less resistance than expected. Winston Churchill reportedly called the operation a masterstroke. To this day, historians consider Operation Mincemeat one of the most successful deception campaigns in military history, all built around the body of a man whose real identity remained hidden from the public for decades. Now let's talk about a book so unsettling it earned the nickname the Devil's Bible. The Codex Gigas is the largest surviving medieval manuscript in the world, weighing over 165 pounds and containing a full Latin Bible alongside historical texts and a massive illustration of the devil himself. Legend claims it was written in a single night by a monk who sold his soul to the devil to avoid being buried alive as punishment for breaking his vows. Of course, historians agree that's not literally possible, and modern analysis suggests the handwriting is consistent, meaning it was likely written by one dedicated monk over roughly 20 to 30 years. Still, the legend persists because of how eerily uniform and precise the handwriting remains throughout the entire book, almost inhumanly consistent for something created without modern tools. The manuscript is kept today in Sweden, and visitors often say the devil's portrait feels unnervingly alive, watching whoever dares to look too long. Finally, let's end with a story about how ignorance once glowed in the dark, literally. In the early 1900s, young women were hired to paint watch dials with radium-based paint because it glowed beautifully at night. Supervisors told them to lick their brushes into a fine point for precision, unaware, or perhaps indifferent, to the radiation risks. These workers became known as the Radium Girls, and many developed horrifying illnesses, including jaw disintegration, anemia, and bone cancer, sometimes years later. Their bodies were later found to be so radioactive that some still trigger Geiger counters today, decades after burial. Despite company denials and cover-ups, a group of these women fought a landmark legal battle that led directly to the creation of modern workplace safety regulations in the United States. Their courage forced industries everywhere to acknowledge invisible workplace dangers. Today, their story stands as one of the most important yet lesser-known turning points in the history of workers' rights.